Hey everyone, and welcome back to the deep dive. If you're prepping for those big exams, particularly the UPSC, staying on top of current issues is like so crucial.
Yeah.
And that's exactly why we're diving into a pretty significant topic today.
Absolutely. Today we're tackling India's preparedness when it comes to dealing with extreme heat.
Which is, it's becoming a bigger and bigger issue, right?
Yeah, no, for sure.
I mean, we saw those crazy heat waves even early on this year.
Yeah, even back in February, Goa and Maharashtra were already facing heat wave conditions. And several other regions, places like Odisha, Telangana, and Maharashtra were hitting above 40 degrees Celsius. It's intense.
Yeah, and it's not just about discomfort, right? We're talking about real threats to people's health and lives.
Right, the impact on health is a huge concern.
I mean, just looking at the data from the NDMA, the National Disaster Management Authority, they showed this really concerning rise in deaths from heat stroke. Between 2020 and 2022, it jumped from 530 to 730.
Yeah, that's a significant increase. It really is. Now, for 2024, the NDMA figures seem a bit lower, 269 suspected deaths and 161 confirmed.
Right.
But there's this discrepancy. A nonprofit called Heatwatch reported a way higher number, 733 deaths in a similar time frame. So already, even before we get into the specifics, it raises some questions about how we're actually tracking this vital data.
Definitely, yeah. That's a critical point.
Okay, so before we get too deep, let's lay some groundwork. What exactly are heat action plans? What are we talking about here?
So heat action plans, we often call them HAPs for short. They're essentially these early warning systems
Right.
to help communities get ready and reduce the negative impacts of extreme heat. You can think of them like a framework of different measures. They're broadly split into two categories: immediate actions that you take when a heat wave is either happening or about to happen, and then longer-term strategies for building resilience over time.
Okay, that makes sense.
The main goal, the big picture, is to really lower the number of deaths and illnesses that happen because of these high temperatures.
Okay, so when we talk about those immediate measures, like what kind of things are we talking about? What's in those plans?
So immediate measures, it's all about, reacting quickly,
Yeah.
protecting people during those periods of intense heat. So issuing forecasts and early warnings.
Makes sense.
So people, and the authorities can be ready. Then running these public awareness campaigns, really vital. Educating people about the dangers of heat stroke, how to stay safe.
Right.
And then, setting up these heat shelters or cooling centers.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So people could just get away from the heat.
Just get a break.
Yeah, exactly. Making sure there's plenty of clean drinking water available, preventing dehydration. And then finally, making sure that the hospitals and healthcare facilities are ready. They've got the resources, the trained staff to treat people who are suffering from heat-related illnesses. So these are all, they're like the crucial first aid steps we take when a heat wave hits.
Yeah, like applying a Band-Aid, you're saying?
Yeah. Exactly. Band-Aids when it hits. But as this study points out, it can't just be about Band-Aids.
Right. So shifting gears a little bit to that bigger picture, what about these longer-term strategies? What do they involve?
Long-term strategies, it's about being proactive, building that capacity to withstand extreme heat over time.
Okay.
So this includes things like incorporating heat considerations into urban planning, like increasing tree cover.
Oh, like green spaces.
Green spaces, yeah, which can significantly cool down those urban environments. Then there's things like using heat-resistant building materials.
Makes sense.
And implementing cool roofing technologies.
Right, to keep those indoor temperatures lower.
Absolutely. That can really help combat that urban heat island effect.
Right.
But beyond that, something that's really key is strengthening coordination.
Yeah.
We need different levels of government, your local municipal bodies, all the way up to state-level agencies, working together seamlessly. And not just government, healthcare providers, community organizations, emergency services, everyone needs to be on the same page for this long-term preparedness.
It sounds like a massive coordination effort.
It really is.
Okay, so we've got a sense of what these plans involve, in theory. But what's the reality? What's happening on the ground? This study from the Sustainable Futures Collaborative, that's the one we're talking about today, right? They really dig into how well these plans are actually being implemented, right?
Yeah, they do. And they looked specifically at 9 Indian cities. These are cities with populations over 1 million people that are expected to experience the most dramatic increases in what we call the heat index.
Heat index.
Yeah, it's a measure that combines temperature and humidity to reflect the actual heat that a person feels.
So how it really feels, not just what the thermometer says.
Exactly. So the Lok Sabha, they back in July 2024, they had a response that indicated the NDMA is working with state governments to put these HAPs into action in 23 states. 23 states that they've identified as prone to heat waves.
So it sounds like a pretty big effort.
It does. It does. But the SFC study, they paint a more nuanced picture.
Ah, right.
Their primary finding is that while a lot of cities have put some short-term measures in place, the longer-term strategies, they're either missing or not being implemented effectively.
So it's a mixed bag.
Yeah. It's like we're doing some things right, but falling short in other crucial areas.
And what about those short-term measures? What are they seeing in those 9 cities when a heat wave is on the horizon?
So in those 9 cities, they found that the most common short-term measures were, they were focused on immediate relief.
Like what we talked about, those Band-Aids.
Exactly. So making sure there's drinking water in public places. And in some industries, they've adopted adjusted work schedules, to avoid those peak heat hours.
So people aren't working in the hottest part of the day.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's something, but it sounds like the bigger challenges are those more fundamental long-term strategies.
Right.
Where are they seeing the gaps there?
So several really critical long-term actions, they're just lacking. They're poorly executed. For instance, they found a real lack of cooling solutions targeted at vulnerable populations. So the elderly, low-income communities, people who work outdoors, those folks.
Like we really need it the most.
Exactly. They also highlighted the lack of insurance mechanisms to compensate people who lose income because of those extreme heat days. They can't work, they lose money, and there's no safety net.
Wow.
And then fire management services, right? Services equipped to handle that increased risk of fires during heat waves.
Oh, yeah.
Largely missing.
Yep.
And then necessary upgrades to the electricity grid. The grid just can't cope with that huge demand for cooling when a heat wave hits.
Right. So many people are cranking up the AC, and the system can't handle it.
Exactly. So yeah, we can offer some relief.
Yeah.
But in terms of prevention, building long-term resilience, we're really not doing enough.
So it's almost like we're reacting to the symptoms, but not addressing the root causes.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Even when efforts are made, it's worrying that they might not be reaching the most vulnerable people. You mentioned this misaligned urban planning issue.
Yes.
What did the study find there?
So they noticed that while some cities are trying to increase those green spaces and plant trees.
Which is good, right?
It is good in theory. But these efforts, they're often not directed at the areas that need it most.
Oh, so like neighborhoods that get hit the hardest by the heat?
Yeah, exactly. So you might see new parks in more affluent areas.
Right.
But the densely populated low-income areas, those are the ones that bake.
They're the ones that are suffering the most.
Yeah, and they're being overlooked, which just makes those inequalities even worse.
So it's not just about doing something, it's about doing the right things in the right places.
Exactly.
Sounds like a lack of targeted action.
It really is.
And even when those long-term plans exist, it sounds like we're focusing more on reacting to the consequences instead of actually preventing them.
Yeah, that's a key insight. The study found that a lot of these long-term measures, they prioritized, beefing up healthcare responses, making sure hospitals can handle more heat stroke patients. But that's after the fact, right?
Right.
We need more focus on those proactive measures that could actually bring down the number of people getting sick in the first place. A good healthcare system is, of course, crucial.
Of course.
But we need a much stronger emphasis on prevention to really build that heat resilience.
So the million-dollar question then is, what's stopping us from implementing those crucial long-term strategies effectively?
Yeah, well,
The study pointed to institutional and financial constraints. Right?
yeah, those are the big roadblocks. So first, the lack of coordination between different levels of government. You've got municipal districts, state authorities, and when they're not working together smoothly, not sharing information effectively, it becomes almost impossible to plan and execute those, big, comprehensive, long-term solutions that we need. It requires a joined-up approach.
Right. Everyone has to be on the same page.
Exactly. And then the other piece, of course, is the money.
Funding.
The funding. Inadequate financial resources were a major barrier, they found. And these long-term solutions, they need significant sustained investment.
Consistent investment, not just a one-time thing.
Yeah. And if that money's not there, if it's not prioritized, then those plans they just gather dust,
They're just plans on paper.
Exactly.
So it's a concerning picture. We see the threat, we're taking some steps, but we're falling short when it comes to those big fundamental changes that we need to protect our people from these increasingly brutal heat waves.
It is concerning. And it's particularly worrying when you consider the global context.
Hmm.
Reducing emissions. It's such a slow and complex process.
It's a global challenge.
It is. So these adaptation strategies, these HAPs, they become even more critical.
So we can deal with the reality we're facing right now?
Exactly. We can't afford to wait for global solutions. We need to act now.
But, and this is something I found really interesting in the study, even as we adapt, we have to be careful about unintended consequences,
Right.
like environmental consequences. They pointed out that, we need affordable cooling devices, of course,
Yeah.
but some of those devices rely on refrigerants that damage the ozone layer, contribute to global warming.
Yeah, that's a classic example of solving one problem and creating another.
Right. It's like we're trying to cool down, but we're heating up the planet in the process.
Exactly. So it's got to be a holistic approach. We have to consider the whole system.
So what are some of those better alternatives that they suggest, those sustainable options we can integrate into our planning?
So they really push for green buildings.
Okay.
Buildings designed to stay cooler naturally.
Smart.
Yeah, passive cooling techniques that don't use a lot of energy. And then green infrastructure, things like urban forests, permeable pavements.
So changing the landscape of our cities.
Yeah, changing the landscape. These things help regulate temperatures, they fight that urban heat island effect, and they do it in an environmentally friendly way.
That's encouraging.
It is.
So what's the main takeaway from the Sustainable Futures Collaborative? What's their big recommendation for India?
Their top recommendation is for India to develop a comprehensive national heat strategy, like a really clear roadmap for the whole country.
Okay, so a big picture plan.
Yeah, and to make sure that's baked into the National Adaptation Plan before COP30 in Brazil.
So we're showing up with a solid plan.
Exactly. And this would provide that, much needed framework, a clear direction for all these heat resilience efforts across the country.
So it sounds like we're talking about leadership at the national level.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
It's essential.
So to kind of sum up everything we've discussed today, it's clear that India has made some progress, right? We're putting things in place to respond to extreme heat.
Yeah.
But there's this big gap when it comes to those long-term strategies, the ones that will really make a difference in the long run. And that's a key finding from this study by the Sustainable Futures Collaborative.
Right. They did a fantastic job of highlighting these crucial areas where we need to improve.
And for our listeners, especially those of you prepping for the UPSC exams,
Yeah.
this is crucial stuff.
It is.
Understanding these challenges, how policy works, the role of urban planning, how different levels of government coordinate or don't coordinate. This all feeds into your mains and maybe even prelims too.
It's all connected.
It really is. And here's a final thought to leave you with. Given how these extreme weather events are becoming more and more frequent, how can India strike that balance? That balance between providing immediate relief when disaster strikes and implementing those long-term systemic changes that we need for real, lasting climate resilience?
It's a tough question, but an important one.
It's a tough question, but it's the question we need to be asking.
Right. It has huge policy implications.
So as you continue your prep, keep that in mind. Think about those implications. We hope this deep dive, based on that Indian Express coverage of the Sustainable Futures Collaborative study, has been helpful.
Yeah, we hope you got a lot out of it.
If you have any questions or you want us to dig into other related topics, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, leave a comment below. And just to remind everyone, the primary source for all of this was the reporting in the Indian Express on that study by the Sustainable Futures Collaborative.
It's definitely worth a read.
All right, until next time, everyone, happy studying.